Even though Jack spent most of his time at the car junkyard, he generally liked his job. Sure, that's if you ignore the stench of used motor oil and the choking smell of burning tyres. Jack got the position of junkyard watchman quite by accident. With a criminal record, finding a decent job was nearly impossible. He ended up in prison for defending a girl at a party. The guy he hit was a rich kid with police connections. Jack got 5 years, serving the full term. His fiancée left him, cutting all ties. After release, he struggled to find work. He worked various jobs but faced constant mistreatment. That was until the local AJC offered him a job as a guard at the dump. At first, Jack found the offer insulting and even unpleasant, but then, realizing that an ex-con doesn't have many other options, he agreed. The most surprising part was that they hired him on completely official terms, with all the paperwork and the necessary documents. His predecessor in that not-so-appealing position was an old man who practically never left the guard shack, spending all day reading books and doing crosswords. Eventually, the place fell into total chaos, made worse by random fires that started here and there in different parts of the yard. That was when the crossword-loving pensioner was let go, and the job opened up for the guy with a criminal past. Of course, Jack knew what he was getting into: the stench, the unsanitary conditions, and the endless heaps of rusty car parts that people had discarded. The first time he arrived, he felt like turning around and running away. All around were old, dented car bodies, shattered glass and piles of shredded tires, while smouldering mounds of rubber gave the place a desolate, post-apocalyptic look. Hell no. You could really lose your mind here, Jack muttered, staring gloomily at the guard shack where he was supposed to spend his shifts. But then, pulling himself together, he took a key from his pocket and unlocked the makeshift hut, thrown together from random construction scrap. It barely hung on its rusty hinges and creaked like the unslicked joints of a tin man. Inside were a table, a chair and a bed whose worn-out springs sagged close to the floor. Yeah, definitely not the kind of place you'd bring anyone over, Jack thought with a bitter smirk. In the beginning he figured he wouldn't last a week in this dump, but he got used to the harsh conditions and kept the job. There were even a few perks that cheered him up financially. For starters, the drifters there would hand over a portion of the money they earned from selling salvageable metal and other scrap. Sure, they might have refused to pay their fee, but then they'd be banned from entering the junkyard. So, the homeless of all sorts preferred to share a cut with the watchman and avoid trouble with him. Early on, Jack would still go back to the apartment he'd inherited from his parents after their passing. But then he basically stopped going to the city at all and settled in at the junkyard. He only went downtown to pick up his paycheck. Whenever he got paid, he would spend most of his money on good food and treats, hauling them back to his little guard shack. Sometimes he would share them with those drifters who behaved decently and didn't act like total animals. That was how things went today, when Jack had just collected his wages yet again. But this time his sense of satisfaction was ruined by a tramp called Raspy. No one knew his real name, so everyone just used the nickname. Raspy was waiting for Jack near the shack, smoking a cigar-sized roll-up. Seeing him, Jack tensed up a bit and asked, "What's up, Raspy? You need something, or you just hanging out?" Raspy took one last drag, flicked the butt into a pile of rusted metal. "Yeah, Jack. So there's something... I'm not even sure how to say it," he began, sounding hesitant. "Come on, spit it out. You want me to pry it out of you with pliers?" Jack snapped. Okay, but it might be easier if you see it for yourself." "Follow me," Raspy answered shakily, realizing that it'd be hard to get rid of him otherwise. Jack left his bag of groceries in the shack and followed. Raspy led him along a winding path through heaps of car parts, carefully skirting puddles of used oil in varying states of freshness. They walked for about 10 minutes before the tramp finally stopped and pointed at a pile of nasty, burnt-smelling rags. Bewildered, Jack stepped closer and nearly passed out from what he saw. It turned out that in all its horrific glory there lay a mangled human corpse. Judging by the extent of decomposition, the body had been there for a while. The victim's throat was torn open, revealing with terrifying clarity a chalk-white vertebra. The churned-up ground and scattered debris around suggested that the poor soul had struggled fiercely before dying. "Oh, God, who could have done that?" Jack asked, trying not to throw up. "I don't know. People over on the far side of the yard say this kind of thing started a couple weeks back. Folks going missing, you know, mostly at night. Then after a while they'd find the bodies torn up like this. Sometimes they looked even worse," Raspy said, nodding at the mutilated corpse. "Damn! So why'd you keep quiet this whole time? Did you know him?" Jack asked in frustration. "Yeah, I did. But does that change anything? Think anybody's going to come looking for a bunch of drifters? Nobody gives a damn if we die. Maybe we got poisoned by bad booze, or maybe a pack of stray dogs tore us apart." Raspy shrugged. In response, Jack simply nodded grimly, avoiding eye contact. He knew himself that nobody cared about the homeless who scraped by in the junkyard as best they could. Jack's first instinct was to call the cops. He actually pulled out his phone, but after another glance at the body, he changed his mind. "I call the cops, they show up. So what? I'm an ex-con. They won't bother investigating, they'll just pin the murder on me, and from there it's not far to a life sentence," Jack thought. So instead of telling the authorities, he decided to bury the body deeper in the soft, almost peat-like soil. Handing Raspy a shovel, Jack began to dig a grave. Sweat poured down their faces, making them look like deranged gold prospectors. An hour later, they had a decent grave dug. Lifting the corpse with their shovels, they slid it in and hastily covered it with dirt. "There. That's better. And don't forget, Raspy, if anyone asks, you haven't seen a thing, got it?" Jack said, catching his breath. The tramp nodded, rolling another cigarette as he walked. Jack knew it was wrong, but he really didn't want to draw attention from the cops, so he said goodbye to Raspy, locked himself in his hut, and drank himself unconscious on cheap wine. In his drunken delirium, Jack dreamed of dead bodies and massive graves that plunged straight down into some infernal pit. The next morning he woke up with a skull-splitting headache, as if nails were being driven into his brain. "Damn! Why'd I get that trashed last night?" he muttered, wincing. Only when he saw his mud-caked boots did he remember burying that torn-up corpse with Raspy the day before. Groaning, Jack began to assure himself he'd done the right thing. "Yeah, the poor guy's gone. Can't help him now, but I've still got a life ahead of me," he thought. Resigned to it, Jack went about his routine, checking how many trucks had delivered junk overnight, then deciding to scatter rat poison around the shack. While wandering the junkyard, he sensed uneasy stares from the drifters. When they saw him, they startled and acted like they were totally absorbed in their own business. Could Raspy have blabbed? He's not much of a talker, but too much booze can loosen anyone's tongue, Jack pondered. He didn't have time to finish the thought when Raspy reappeared, breathing alcoholic fumes in his face, and informed him. Someone else disappeared last night. He snuck off to rummage with a flashlight in a new pile of junk, and they just found his mutilated body half a mile from here. The head torn right off, blood everywhere, and guts scattered across the yard. Raspy's words made Jack shudder. So another murder? We've got to stop this, flitted through the watchman's mind. But what can I do, Raspy? Go after this midnight killer with an axe? Jack blurted bitterly. Why an axe? I saw you got that old shotgun under the bed left by the previous watchman. We can use that. I'll take a hatchet and a knife, Raspy suggested. Jack looked at him and realized the tramp was dead serious. They agreed to hunt the nocturnal killer that very night. Raspy proposed they set up an ambush in a mound of scrap. Jack would hide there with the shotgun. I'll walk around making myself bait. And when that monster shows up, you blow it away, Raspy added. Good plan, but don't forget, I'm no crack shot. I've only held a gun once before, Jack said anxiously. Yet Raspy wasn't about to be persuaded otherwise. Later, when dusk settled in, they arrived at the spot and quietly arranged their hideout. Sure, Jack and Raspy tried guessing who or what might be behind the killings. They eventually convinced themselves it was probably a rabid stray dog that had developed a taste for human flesh. Now, crouched in a makeshift niche, Jack kept the shotgun trained on Raspy, who walked back and forth playing the victim. Time passed, and under the moonlight nothing stirred. Then Raspy suddenly grew uneasy, as if he sensed something approaching. Is something about to happen, Jack thought, sweating through his palms. Meanwhile, Raspy began acting strangely. His movements turned abrupt, as if he couldn't contain a raging energy inside. At one point, he even let out a whimpering sound like a starving dog. What's going on with him? This is all kind of weird. Come to think of it, he was the one who found the body, told me about it, then suggested the ambush. But how exactly did he know so much? Jack wondered. At that moment, Jack snapped open the double-barreled shotgun and was horrified to see there were no shells inside. What the hell? Raspy must have pocketed them while I was setting up the hiding spot. But why? He thought, drenched in cold sweat. Then he looked at Raspy's position and saw the tramp watching him with a predatory grin. Raspy's face contorted, turning into something monstrous. His lips curled and trembled, revealing strong white teeth. "So, you ready to die, Jack? Quite a trick, luring you into this trap. I thought about killing you even back when we buried that body. But then I decided to play a little cat and mouse," snarled the tramp, whose features were now unrecognizable. "No, no, why? What did I ever do to you? Why'd you kill those people?" Jack cried out in panic, scrambling from his hiding place. The creature in Raspy's shape took a few steps closer and growled. "Oh, it's quite a story, Jack. 3 months ago I found an old fridge dumped here, loaded with frozen meat, still in good shape. I hesitated, but tried a piece. And let me tell you, I've never tasted anything better. Then I realized it was human flesh. I only noticed the chunk of a human thigh at the bottom too late. Didn't tell a soul, devoured all the meat alone, and a week later, I felt this strange call. Ever since, it wakes in me at night and orders me to kill." Jack felt sick hearing that awful confession. He realized the killer's bloodlust far outweighed any reason. Without further thought, he bolted, recalling prison stories about fugitives who ended up eating their fellow escapees. Those who tasted human flesh and were eventually caught returned as something less than human, beasts lusting only for blood. Jack didn't know how that human meat ended up in the fridge, but he had neither time nor desire to figure it out. Instead, he ran for his life, aware the monster was hot on his heels. The snarling cannibal was about to catch him when Jack suddenly remembered the rat poison pellets he still had in his pocket. A desperate plan flashed through his mind. "All right, you want to eat me? Then come on," he yelled, slowing down and discreetly dipping his hand into his pocket. A moment later, the creature knocked him off his feet, jaw snapping at his throat. Drool spilled from its mouth, anticipating a bloody feast. The beast needed just one more lunge to kill Jack. But Jack was ready. He shoved a hefty handful of poison pellets into its jaws, aware it was a potent lab-designed toxin strong enough to fell an elephant. Soon, the fiend's face twisted, foaming at the mouth as it convulsed in a horrific death spasm. Jack stood up, peering down at the dying cannibal with grim satisfaction. Then he walked away without looking back. He knew he would never work at that junkyard again. Today was, without a doubt, his last day on the job. Please write in the comments, support the video with a like, and of course subscribe to the channel. You can also share this video with your friends. They will probably also be interested.